Not every old machine is a beloved classic. Some were absolute nightmares that drove mechanics insane and bankrupted contractors. Chronic hydraulic leaks, mismatched parts, and electrical systems that seemed possessed. We speak the raw truth here. No sponsorship to hide the flaws. If you value honesty in machinery reviews, subscribe to the channel. Let's open the toolbox of frustration and reveal the 10 excavators that everyone preferred to forget, except us. 1. Early Poclain high-pressure models, the TY45 era. When discussing the history of hydraulic excavators, the French manufacturer Poclain is a giant. They were pioneers, responsible for popularizing the hydraulic excavator in Europe and eventually the United States. However, their early engineering philosophy was radically different from the rest of the world, leading to a love-hate relationship that eventually tilted toward hate for many mechanics and owners. The core of the problem was Poclain's devotion to high-pressure hydraulics. While American and Japanese manufacturers eventually standardized on systems running between 2,000 and 2,500 psi, pounds per square inch, Poclain pushed their systems to the limit, operating at a staggering 4,000 to over 5,000 psi. The most infamous example was the Poclain TY45. On paper, this made sense. Higher pressure allowed for smaller cylinders and lighter components to achieve the same lifting force. In reality, however, the sealing technology of the 1960s and 70s simply could not sustain that level of pressure reliably. These machines became notorious for what operators called the red fountain. When a hose burst or a seal failed on a Poclain, which happened frequently, the hydraulic fluid didn't just drip, it sprayed out with dangerous cutting force, atomizing into a red mist that coated the entire machine and the job site. Mechanics despised these machines. The high-pressure system meant that standard hydraulic hoses and fittings available at the local auto parts store or Tractor Supply were useless. Owners were forced to source expensive proprietary high-pressure fittings, often waiting weeks for parts while the machine sat dead. Furthermore, the high pressure generated immense heat. In hot climates, the TY45 and its siblings were prone to overheating the hydraulic fluid, which would thin out the oil, lead to sluggish performance, and further degrade the rubber seals, creating a vicious cycle of leaks and downtime. While the TY45 is a collectible icon today, in its prime, it was often the source of a puddle of oil and a headache for the foreman. 2. The Drott Yumbo. The Drott Yumbo represents a confused era in excavation history. Before fully tracked, 360-degree excavators became the standard. Manufacturers experimented with mounting digging units on truck chassis or strange, dedicated crawler bases. The Yumbo was originally an Italian design by Bruneri that Drott Manufacturing licensed and brought to the American market. While it deserves credit for being an early hydraulic adopter, the operator experience was dismal. The primary complaint regarding the Drott Yumbo was its lethargy. It was significantly underpowered compared to the cable shovels it was trying to replace, and it lacked the speed of later hydraulic systems. The machine utilized a relatively primitive hydraulic circuit that did not allow for simultaneous functions. An operator often had to stop swinging to lift the boom, or stop lifting to curl the bucket. This lack of flow sharing made the cycle times excruciatingly slow. Furthermore, the swing mechanism was a constant source of frustration. Unlike modern excavators that use a robust planetary gear reduction for smooth, continuous rotation, many early Yumbos and similar Drott models utilized a rack and pinion swing system or under-engineered swing motors. This resulted in a jerky motion. The machine would lurch when starting a swing and drift when stopping. For precision work, such as laying pipe or digging trench boxes, the Drott Yumbo was infuriating. Operators also complained about the machine's stability, or lack thereof. Whether mounted on a truck or the narrow crawler base, the Yumbo had a high center of gravity and a relatively light footprint. When digging in hard clay or attempting to lift a heavy load over the side, the machine felt tippy. The Yumbo name became synonymous with a machine that was great for light ditch cleaning, but useless for serious production digging. It was a machine that couldn't decide if it wanted to be a crane or a shovel, failing to excel at either. 3. Bucyrus-Erie Dynahoe, the Big Daddy disaster. The Dynahoe, specifically the models produced under the Bucyrus-Erie banner, after they acquired High Dynamic, is a legendary example of American excess. Bigger must be better. The Dynahoe wasn't a standard excavator. It was a backhoe loader that had been consuming steroids. While standard backhoes from Case or Ford were nimble utility machines, the Dynahoe was a massive, dedicated digging unit built on a rigid, heavy frame. The philosophy behind the Dynahoe was to create a backhoe that could dig like a tracked excavator. The result, however, was a machine that was simply too heavy for its own good. Models like the Dynahoe 190 or 200 weighed nearly twice as much as a standard backhoe. While this weight provided stability on dry, hard pavement, it was a disaster in the real world of construction sites, which are often muddy and uneven. Operators hated the Dynahoe for its tendency to sink. Because it used tires rather than tracks, the immense weight was concentrated on 4 points. As soon as a Dynahoe entered a wet job site, it became a lawn dart. The front tires would slice into the mud, and the rear drive tires would spin helplessly. Once a Dynahoe was stuck, its sheer mass made it incredibly difficult to recover. You couldn't just pull it out with a pickup truck, you needed a bulldozer. Additionally, the machine was physically exhausting to operate. It was massive, long, and had a terrible turning radius. Maneuvering a Dynahoe around a tight housing development or a busy street was stressful. It was described as driving a school bus that digs. The controls were often heavy mechanical linkages in the early models, requiring significant physical force to actuate. By the end of an 8-hour shift, the operator was physically spent from wrestling the levers and fighting the steering wheel. While it was built like a tank and nearly indestructible, its lack of agility and inability to handle soft ground made it a hated machine for anyone who didn't work exclusively on dry, flat concrete. 4. Hi-Hoe, Hydraulic Machinery Co. The Hydraulic Machinery Company, better known by its catchy trade name Hi-Hoe, sits in the history books as a classic example of first-mover disadvantage. Pioneer, being a pioneer in the late 1950s and 1960s, meant they were essentially inventing the rules of hydraulic excavation as they went along, often with crude and rustic results. These machines, instantly recognizable by their distinct pinkish-red paint jobs, were industrial experiments sold to contractors. While they deserve respect for helping launch the hydraulic era, operating one was often a lesson in frustration. The primary hatred for the Hi-Hoe stemmed from its fragility, specifically regarding its hydraulic plumbing. In the early days of the industry, hydraulic hose technology had not quite caught up with the pressures and physical stresses of daily excavation work. Hi-Hoes were notorious for blowing hoses constantly. A day of work frequently involved an unexpected hydraulic shower. Operators reported that the routing of the hoses was exposed and poorly thought out, leaving them vulnerable to snagging on tree branches, rebar, or even the machine's own boom during tight maneuvers. Beyond the constant leaks, the geometry of the boom was deeply flawed by modern standards. The digging arc was awkward and inefficient. These machines struggled with crowd force, the power generated when pulling the stick dipper toward the machine, when the arm was fully extended. Worse, they had significant dead spots close to the tracks, where the bucket simply couldn't reach effectively due to the limitations of the cylinder strokes. This forced the operator to constantly reposition the tracks just to finish a simple trench or load a truck parked nearby. The Hi-Hoe was a machine that often required more maintenance hours than it provided digging hours, earning it a reputation as a mechanic's special rather than a reliable production tool. 5. International Harvester Excavators, 600 Series. International Harvester, IH, was a titan of American industry, revered for its legendary farm tractors, bulldozers, and trucks. When they decided to enter the growing hydraulic excavator market with the 600 series, such as the 630, 640, and 650, the industry expected a game-changer that would dominate the job site. Instead, buyers received a confusing, overcomplicated machine that failed to live up to the international harvester pedigree. The most hated aspect of the IH excavators was the control interface. In an era before the ISO vs. SAE control pattern became the binary standard, IH engineers designed control layouts that felt alien to experienced operators. The lever placement and function mapping were often counterintuitive. Operators hopping from a link belt or a Koehring into an IH machine found themselves fighting their own muscle memory, leading to dangerous job site errors, such as swinging the house when they intended to boom up. This made the machines unpopular with rental fleets and unions, as retraining operators for the specific quirks of the IH controls was a waste of time. Furthermore, IH attempted to integrate electrical complexity into these machines before the technology was rugged enough for the dirt world. The 600 series suffered from chronic electrical reliability issues. Solenoids would fail, safety switches would corrode from exposure to the elements, and wiring harnesses were prone to chafing against the vibrating metal frame. It was not uncommon for a mechanically sound machine to be rendered a 20-ton paperweight because of a failed relay or a short circuit deep within the chassis. Owners hated them because they required a master electrician to diagnose the problem, whereas most job sites only had diesel mechanics. The failure of the 600 series proved that just because a company can build a great bulldozer, it doesn't mean they understand the brutal nuances of hydraulic excavation. 6. Koehring Skooper, the maintenance nightmare. In the annals of excavation history, the Koehring Skooper, notably the 505 model, stands out as a brilliant concept that was ultimately defeated by the harsh realities of dirt and grit. To understand why this machine was hated by the maintenance crews who had to keep it running, one must first understand what it tried to achieve. In the 1960s, standard excavators were relatively slow at loading trucks because they had to swing the entire upper structure, the house, back and forth for every bucket load. Wheel loaders were faster, but they couldn't dig in soft mud. Koehring attempted to combine the best of both worlds with the Skooper. The Skooper was a track-mounted machine that didn't need to swing its body to load a truck. Instead, it utilized a unique hydraulic crowd mechanism. The boom and bucket could slide horizontally forward and backward, independent of the chassis, simulating the action of a wheel loader, but on a stable track platform. On the showroom floor, this was revolutionary. It promised the cycle times of a loader with the traction of an excavator. However, in the field, the crowd mechanism proved to be a maintenance catastrophe. To achieve that sliding horizontal loading action, Koehring engineered a complex system of rollers, rails, and telescoping hydraulic rams housed within the boom structure. Construction sites are, by definition, dirty environments filled with abrasive silica, mud, and rock dust. This abrasive material inevitably found its way into the lubricated slide rails and roller assemblies of the Skooper. Mechanics loathed this machine because the crowd system was essentially a grit trap. The abrasive paste formed by grease and dirt would chew through the rollers and jam the sliding mechanism. Servicing it was not a simple matter of greasing a pin. It often required dismantling major sections of the heavy boom assembly to replace buried wear pads and seized rollers. The downtime was significant, and the repair bills were astronomical. While the Skooper could move dirt quickly when it was working, the ratio of maintenance hours to operating hours was skewed heavily in the wrong direction, leading many owners to abandon the concept in favor of standard, simpler front shovels or wheel loaders. 7. Gradall, early single-engine models. The Gradall is a unique and respected name in the industry, famous for its telescoping, rotating boom that can finish slopes and clean ditches like no other machine. However, the early generations of these machines, specifically the single-engine truck-mounted models, earned a specific kind of hatred from operators who found themselves stranded on highways. The core design philosophy of these early units was economy and weight saving. Instead of having two engines, one to drive the truck chassis and another to power the hydraulic excavator upper structure, manufacturers utilized a single engine located in the truck chassis. This engine powered the wheels for highway travel, but via a power takeoff (PTO) and a complex transfer case system, It also sent power up to the excavator unit to run the hydraulic pumps. The hatred for this configuration stemmed from the single point of failure scenario. In a dual-engine machine, if the truck engine died, you could still use the upper engine to move the boom, fold it up, and secure it for towing. In the single-engine Gradall, if the main engine failed, which happened frequently due to the immense strain of powering both the drivetrain and the heavy hydraulics, the entire machine became a dead weight. Operators recount nightmare scenarios where the engine would blow a rod or overheat while the boom was fully extended, digging a ditch or reaching over a barrier. Without engine power, the hydraulics were dead. The boom could not be retracted or lowered safely. You were left with a massive, oddly shaped machine blocking traffic, with its arms sticking out into the road, and no way to move it without a specialized recovery crane. Furthermore, the remote drive systems, allowing the operator to drive the truck from the upper cab, were often pneumatic or mechanical nightmares that leaked or jammed, leaving the operator with no brakes or no steering control while creeping along a job site. 8. Case 35. The unstable pioneer. Today, mini excavators are the bread and butter of urban construction. But in the 1970s and 80s, the American market was dominated by the bigger is better mentality. The Case 35 represents one of the early, awkward attempts to introduce the compact excavator concept to a market addicted to massive backhoe loaders. While Case, often partnering with other manufacturers like Drott, or rebadging European Japanese designs during this era, was a leader in backhoes, their early mini excavators were plagued by severe stability issues. The Case 35 was hated primarily for its tippy nature. At the time, engineering standards for compact machine balance were still being refined. The machine had a very narrow track width to allow it to fit through gates and into backyards. However, the upper structure and the boom geometry were often too heavy for this narrow footprint. The center of gravity was perilously high. American operators, used to the rock-solid stability of a heavy Case 580 backhoe, with its stabilizers spread wide, found the Case 35 terrifying. If an operator swung the house 90 degrees over the side of the tracks with a full bucket of wet clay, the machine had a frightening tendency to lift its opposite track off the ground. There was no warning wobble. It would often just go. This instability was exacerbated by the primitive control valves of the era, which lacked the smoothness of modern hydraulics. A jerky movement on the stick combined with the high center of gravity could easily put the machine on its side. Operators called them suicide machines, or tumblers. Additionally, the operator stations were often cramped and lacked the ROPS, rollover protection system standards we have today, making a rollover a genuinely life-threatening event. The Case 35 faded into history because it couldn't compete with the stability and versatility of the skid-steer loader, which was rising to prominence at the same time, leaving the mini excavator market to be later perfected by companies like Kubota and Yanmar. 9. Ford excavators. The P-Series Richier experiment. To the American contractor, the name Ford is synonymous with reliability. From the Model T to the N-Series tractors, Ford built the machines that built America. However, in the 1970s, Ford made a strategic error that alienated many of its loyal customers. The P-Series excavators, such as the P42 and P44. These machines are a textbook example of badge engineering gone wrong, and they were hated not for how they dug, but for how impossible they were to keep alive. Ford wanted to enter the booming hydraulic excavator market quickly. Rather than designing a machine from the ground up, they acquired the French manufacturer Richier and simply repainted the machines Ford Blue. While Richier machines were decent in Europe, bringing them to the North American market created a logistical nightmare. The entire machine was built to metric standards in an era when every American mechanic's toolbox was filled with SAE, standard, wrenches. Owners hated these machines because of the parts supply chain. If a Ford tractor broke down, you could get parts at any dealership in the country. If a Ford P-Series excavator broke down, you were often told that the part had to be shipped from France. Downtime stretched from days into weeks. Simple repairs became infuriating because hydraulic fittings and bolt sizes were incompatible with the standard hardware found in U.S. service trucks. Furthermore, the design philosophy was distinctly European, featuring complex, high-speed engines and lighter frames that didn't cope well with the "abuse it until it breaks" mentality of American heavy construction. When Ford eventually dissolved the relationship and exited the heavy excavator market, these machines became orphans. Owners were left with expensive yard ornaments that had zero resale value and no dealer support, leaving a bitter taste in the mouths of those who trusted the blue oval. 10. Hopto 200. The Earth Scratcher. The Hopto 200, produced by Warner & Swassey, who also owned Gradall, holds a place in history as a pioneer, but for the operators who had to earn a living with one, it was often a source of ridicule. In the transition period between cable-operated shovels and high-pressure hydraulics, the Hopto 200 represented the low-power era. These units were typically mounted on the back of truck chassis, often aging or under-capacity trucks, to provide mobility between small jobs. The primary reason this machine was hated was its lack of breakout force. Modern excavators operate at high pressures, over 5,000 psi, allowing them to rip through frost, shale, and hard clay. The early Hopto models operated at much lower pressures with smaller cylinders. They simply lacked the muscle to penetrate hard ground. Experienced operators of the time who were used to the kinetic smashing power of a cable shovel or the grunt of a bulldozer mockingly referred to the Hopto not as an excavator, but as a dirt stirrer or earth scratcher. If the ground was anything harder than loose topsoil or sand, the Hopto 200 would struggle. The boom would stall, and the relief valves would scream, but the bucket wouldn't cut. This made the machine useless for serious utility work or foundation digging in tough conditions. Additionally, because it was mounted on a truck with a high suspension, the digging depth was compromised, and the stability was poor. You felt every vibration and jerk in the truck cab. While the Hopto paved the way for the modern hydraulic backhoe, the Model 200 is remembered as a machine that made a lot of noise but did very little actual work, fading into history as soon as more powerful, track-mounted systems arrived on the scene. Remembering the failures is just as important as celebrating the successes. These hated machines taught the industry what not to do, paving the way for the reliability we have today. If you ever operated a lemon, you know the pain. See you in the next video.